Let me introduce myself. I am Master William Shakespeare.
Okay, so you'll help me, yes? Okay, brilliant! Yes, by Joe's pancreas, that is fantastic! For the first time in months, I am officially in the flower! Yeah!
Shakespeare Goes Viral is a podcast inspired by Will & Co.'s project Bard in the Yard. Learn more about Shakespeare's life, writings, and key themes that inspired him. Listen to writer and director Victoria Gartner tell you a story like no other.
Hi, I'm Kit. I'm a writer and actor, born and bred in Stratford-upon-Avon, so I've been absorbing Shakespeare for my entire life. I've worked on quite a lot of Shakespeare. Bard in the Yard is certainly a remarkable venture, something that stays with me from the first summer we did it, the summer of 2020. Just as things were sort of opening up again, I was called out to this little village just outside of Reading, and they had me perform the show in their town hall, and a whole load of people came from the village to see it, and afterwards the woman who'd organised it brought me back to her house, and we had scones and strawberries, and we just talked about Shakespeare, and about theatre and all of these other things, and she walked me back to the station, and it was this really lovely kind of cross-generational, cross-distances connection that I think Shakespeare gives us and has always given us. And it's something that we've maintained for the last 2 years, however long this has been going on. Something we will maintain.
Poetry and love. Let's get that in there. In fact, my sonnets were doing so well, they rolled off the shelves. I know what you're thinking as well. I know you're thinking the play tarnished my career and traumatised a whole generation. Well, it did. And I know what you're thinking. Maybe my books, my poems, my plays sold because, I don't know, humans are irrevocably fascinated by the great mystery of love, or we need art after tragedy to translate our emotions to the higher cosmic scheme of things. Yeah, well, it's none of that, right? They roll off the shelves because young lads use them to get in their ladies' farthingales.
Episode 2, Shakespeare and Love.
What is love? You know the song that everybody knows, what is love? I'll let you edit this. Shakespeare invented that line. What is love is in Twelfth Night, or What You Will. And Feste the Clown asks the question in the play, what is love? Isn't that wonderful? I'm exaggerating, only slightly, for effect. But I think Shakespeare invented contemporary love, both as a concept and as the expectations we have. Shakespeare completely, pardon my words, fucked up relationships for everybody, because at this point, if a man is not willing to die for me, then it's not good enough, is it? I mean, he did all of humanity such a disservice by inventing the story of Romeo and Juliet, which he didn't invent the whole story of Romeo and Juliet, but, you know, when we think Shakespeare, you just grab somebody in the street, you ask them, Shakespeare, what's the first word that pops into your head? It's either going to be To Be or Not to Be, Hamlet, or it's going to be Romeo and Juliet, right? You know, even if you've never sat through 3 hours of Romeo and Juliet, even if you've never seen the wonderful movie with Claire Danes and Leo DiCaprio by Baz Luhrmann, which you should, you know the story, you know what it is, and you know they die at the end. How do you top this? Isn't it wonderful? In Romeo and Juliet, we all know the ending, and yet every time we're sat in a theatre watching this play, we're thinking, but it doesn't have to be this way. There's an exercise that I often do with students when I do Romeo and Juliet, which is spot the moments where they could have been saved. Spot all the moments in the play where it could have gone a different way. Spoiler alert, there's loads of them. There's loads of points where anything could have gone only like slightly differently, and nobody would have needed to die, you know. But they died, and that's what made them famous. But that's also what makes it, I guess, inaccessible is the word. Idealistic, inaccessible. You know, we live in an age of comparison, and having Romeo and Juliet to compare to is bad. It's just bad.
I'm being my Juliet. Just come onto those steps over there for me, please. Don't worry, you don't have to do too much, don't worry. So just have to go on your balcony, go up to your balcony. Lovely. And look up to the stars. Oh, a bit lower, a bit higher. Lovely. And look like you're in love. Oh. She's unnatural, ladies and gentlemen. Unnatural. Here we go. But soft. What light through yonder window breaks? 'Tis the east, and Juliet is the sun. Rise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who's already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Oh, it is my lady. Oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks. A bit louder.
Hi.
She speaks and yet says, oh, hi, oh. But what of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. But I'm too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business to entreat her eyes, to twinkle in their spheres till they return. What if her eyes were there? They in her head. The brightness of her cheeks would shame those stars, as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy regions stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. Oh, see how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove for health and safety reasons. Upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. Bravo to her, ladies and gentlemen! Give her a round of applause.
What I love about Romeo and Juliet's love is that as much as it's not realistic, it's also in some ways much more realistic than some of the romantic comedies we see where they simplified the stories, right? In a normal, standard Christmas rom-com, you have the beginning, which is an incredibly attractive woman who never has hair anywhere than on her head, with a great job and a lot of money for some reason, even though she doesn't have a great job, she might have a lot of money, who can't find love. And then there's a man who is grumpy at first, and when they meet, they don't like each other. But then, slowly, throughout the process of the show, and through incredible ordeals such as being stuck in a jeep in the middle of a snowy magical forest winter wonderland, they come to know each other better and better, and then realize they are in love. Thankfully, the man turns out not to be a grumpy old grump, but a prince. And then they get married. And that's the end of the movie, right? Now, Romeo and Juliet does not start like this at all. Romeo and Juliet starts with a street fight. Now, Romeo at the beginning of the play is in love with some other chick. He's in love with some other chick called Rosalind. He hasn't slept in weeks because he's super in love. He's being absolutely emo. I love Romeo's parents because they're like, where is Romeo? Find him. And he's like, oh, I'm so in love. I don't want to sleep. And his parents are like, all right, well, listen, we don't really know how to deal with this right now. We're just going to give you some time. Come back home when you're ready. I'm just not going to engage. And then they fuck off. I love it. So he's in love with some other girl. He goes to the ball to see this other girl. and then sees Juliet and is like, wow, now I'm in love with you. It's the best thing. In the meantime, his best friend Mercutio is actually kind of in love with him.
With Romeo.
100%. Absolutely. And the best productions always take that into account. And I think that Shakespeare is much more fluid than we give him credit for. For me, Mercutio has always been a tribute to Christopher Marlowe, who died some years before Shakespeare wrote the play, but who was very flamboyant, very openly gay. Christopher Marlowe kept on shouting to everyone who wanted to hear it that he was gay, and also that he was a spy, so that got him killed, so that wasn't very smart. It's interesting with the Elizabethans, right, and sexuality, because as long as you didn't shout it over the rooftops, what you did in the privacy of your own chambers was your business. And in a lot of Shakespeare plays, there's very strong love, and the word love is used to describe the bond between two male friends. The Merchant of Venice, Antonio and Bassanio. Bassanio comes to ask Antonio to borrow some money so he can go court and marry Portia. But the words that are used are very heavy, and then by the end of The Merchant of Venice, when Antonio faces trial opposite Shylock, and Bassanio wants to go rescue his friend, I mean, they talk about love all the time in that relationship. And that happens a lot. And we see a lot of different forms of love that are deep and romantic. And yeah, I like that it's not as simple as it looks. I think we have simplified it, actually. And in a sense, Shakespeare's love, the concept of love, the place of love in Shakespeare was much broader and much more modern, if you will, than love in Hollywood.
Love! There's a little bit of love, you know. I'm very good at that too. Love. But I know what you're all thinking. You're going to ask me, have I ever been in love with a man? By Jove's grisly moustache, of course I have. Yeah? I mean, I had a major crush on Kit Marlowe. All you need to do is read Sonnets 1 to 1,000, and he's all in there, so there's that. And you know what? I was never really particularly ashamed about it either. And of course I was in love with my wife. She was my first love, in fact. And she gave us children. Wonderful children, dear Susanna, Judith, and Hamlet. Yeah, one love doesn't exclude the other. I don't see why it must. Love. I've fallen in love at first sight so many times. I mean, what can you expect? I'm a poet. But love is the easiest thing to feel, but the hardest thing to write about. But write about it we must. Yeah? Leo? Hannah? Pip? Write about it we must, because it's the reason why we're all here. We're all here because of blind Cupid and his deadly arrows.
All right, let me see. It's the bit with the ring, right? There's a whole bit with the ring where she's like, don't give away my ring. And then Antonio's in trouble and Bassanio's like, here's my ring. Bond of Love. Do you know what? Maybe if I search Bond of Love. Ah, that's in Twelfth Night. That's an actual marriage.
Too easy.
It's not what I want. It's too easy. I mean, marriage is another one of those things, right, that is more complicated than it looks. I love that people in Shakespeare are married off so quickly. In Elizabethan England, if you're not careful, you can be married in like 5 minutes. All it takes is an ordained priest and 2 witnesses, and that's it.
That's what happens in Romeo and Juliet.
Exactly. You don't need a lot of people to get married. And my favourite wedding in Shakespeare is in As You Like It, when the clown Touchstone is marrying the country wench Audrey. And it is just the most ridiculous thing in the world. But it's beautifully written. And he just like grabs someone to be his best man. It happens in a forest in about 5 minutes. They've met like 2 weeks ago. Nobody's asking anybody's fathers about anything. They just grab a priest, get married in the forest, boom, done. It actually turns out to be a fake wedding. But anyway, I'm looking for that scene. I'm just going through The Merchant of Venice. 3,000 ducats. Oh, okay. So it should be somewhere here. Portia. The caskets. So he's made his choice. Okay, more caskets. Portia. Okay, now he's choosing. Bassanio finds out that his friend is in jeopardy. All right, so this is the letter. This is the letter that Antonio writes to Bassanio to ask him to rescue him. And Bassanio is reading the letter out loud. And it reads, "Sweet Bassanio." I mean, I'm going to stop there. Seriously, if you write a text to your mates, are you really like, "Sweet Bassanio"? Sweet Bassanio. All right. "Sweet Bassanio, my ships have all miscarried. I repeat, my ships have all miscarried. My creditors grow cruel. My estate is very low. My bond to the Jew is forfeit. And since in paying it, it is impossible I should live. All debts are cleared between you and I, if I might but see you at my death. Notwithstanding, use your pleasure. If your love do not persuade you to come, let not my letter." My work here is done. I would drop the mic if I was holding it.
Poetry. Sonnets. Yes, of course. I've been writing a lot of sonnets to the missus back home to compensate for me not being around here. So, actually, her favourite one will always be, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, nor bends with the remover to remove. Oh no. It is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempest and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out, even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved." Lovely sonnet, but I didn't write it for my wife, actually. Don't judge, okay. You may find it odd, but it's actually quite relieving not to be so close to my wife during the plague. Look, I'm perfectly aware how the rate of divorce spikes after every plague. But love, that's transcending, isn't it? Love. Poetry and love. Let's get that in
Because
there.
this is 400 years ago, we have to remember that as a society, they were a bit closer to the ancient Greeks. In ancient Greece, real love was only between men. You married a woman, you didn't love her, you married her, and she procreated with you. But real love was between men. And that's interesting, isn't it? Shakespeare went to an all-boys school, because mainly girls didn't go to school. All-boys school, very boyish environment. On the stage, and again, we forget. We tend to not superimpose that image, but on stage are only men.
Meaning that the men were dressed as women and playing female roles.
Absolutely. So in Shakespeare's time, in Elizabethan England, it was seen as completely inappropriate for a woman to be on the stage. So only men were allowed on the stage. So men would dress up in the big dresses, in the big robes. Usually what would happen in a theatre company is that the younger men would play the women. So the men whose voice hadn't changed yet would play the women. One interesting thing about Shakespeare's writing is that he always writes for the company he's working with, right? And we know he starts getting good women, particularly around the time he writes As You Like It. In As You Like It, there's one of Shakespeare's biggest parts for any character in Shakespeare. And that part is Rosalind. And so it was written around 1599, 1600. We know that at that time, it would mean that Shakespeare had a very good boy capable of playing that part and of holding the play together like that. So around that time, he also wrote Hamlet, Julius Caesar. So that was the beginning of the Globe. They had just switched playhouses. They opened the Globe in 1599 with, we think, Julius Caesar. In Julius Caesar, there's one woman, so it doesn't really count, but there we go. Much Ado About Nothing, again, a great woman part. Beatrice, incredible woman part. You need to have someone very good who can pull, pull their weight and pull their own. And then Twelfth Night. And both have very strong females dressing up as men, which makes for the loveliest stuff. They're all men, some of them dressing up as women, which everyone in the audience is absolutely fine with. And it's interesting, isn't it? Everyone in the audience is absolutely okay with men wearing big dresses, fake breasts, makeup, and everyone finds that perfectly decent. So it was all men saying those beautiful words to each other. All the words of love between Romeo and Juliet were exchanged between two men. Two men married each other and killed each other for love on stage. And as much as we suspend our disbelief, right? That's why we go to the theatre, that's why we see films. You still see in front of you two men being in love, consummating their marriage, and killing themselves for love. And that, I think, is beautiful and interesting and much more open-minded.
A leading lady? On top of 3 witches? Oh. Well, that's bold. Oh, yeah, okay, maybe, what to the murkiest pits of hell with all the critics? Yeah.
And a lot of people have commented on the misogyny in Shakespeare's works, which I never quite agree with, because everyone's a product of their times. Shakespeare's a product of late 16th, early 17th centuries. And it was a tougher time for women. It was not that bad a time for women as we might imagine, especially in England. There's an anecdote that I love. It's a Swiss tourist who comes to visit England and then visit the kingdom and stuff. And he writes in his diary entry, he's like, this is incredible. In England, women, married women, all right, but women sit outside their front door in the afternoon and gossip. And it's like, it's the most outrageous thing, because in his country, our country, Switzerland, women would work all the time. They would have household chores, or if they took a break, they wouldn't blatantly do it in front of their house, gossiping with friends, right? In Elizabethan England, a woman can have a job. She can have a job. She can take over her husband's business if he dies. So a lot of widowers never remarry because they're like, why? I can run this show all on my own. So there's a lot of widowers who run inns. Mistress Quickly is based on one such character that I love to imagine was based on someone in real life, right? If you've met any female pub landladies, you know exactly what I mean. It's a wonderfully strong woman, super witty. You would not dare cross her for 1/2 second. They're very strong female characters, very strong queens. England had been governed by a queen for years. It was a time of peace and prosperity, and she did a fantastic job at governing this country without a male counterpart. And Shakespeare writes roles such as Cleopatra, who is still one of the most beautiful parts that you could ever hope for. He writes Cleopatra, Juliet, Lady Macbeth. Cymbeline's a woman.
They are the most wonderful creatures. They are hostesses. They are mistresses. They are queens, mothers, wives, nurses, hunters, adventurers, warriors, all of them. And Cleopatra. Cleopatra is all of them. And she dies as only a queen should die. Give me my robe. Put on my crown. I have immortal longings in me. Now no more the juice of Egypt's grape shall moist this lip. Yea, Ya, good Eras! Methinks I hear Antony call. I see him rouse himself to praise my noble act. I hear him mock the luck of Caesar, which the gods give men to exclude their after wrath. Husband! I come. Now to that name my courage prove my title. I am fire and air, and my other elements I give to baser life. So, have you done? Come then, and take the last warmth of my lips. Farewell, kind Charmian, Eras, long, farewell. Have I the aspic in my lips? Dost fall? If thou and nature may so gently part, the stroke of death is as a lover's pinch, which hurts and is desired. Lie thou there. If thus thou vanishes, thou tell'st the world it is not worth leave taking.
There's so many. Midsummer Night's Dream, we have Titania, Helena, Hermia, Should About Nothing, Beatrice. I mean, Desdemona and Othello gets killed, so that's not really a great example. In Richard III, we all remember Richard III, but there's plenty of women. You know, there's Anne, who ends up being his wife, but then there's Queen Margaret, who's still just lurking about doing prophecies. I love Queen Margaret. Queen Margaret appears in at least 3, maybe 4 of Shakespeare's plays. I believe 4, actually. And I just love her. She just goes about just being a strong, bold woman, just telling all the men what to do and behaving like an absolute wildebeest. And I love that about her. And Richard III, she's just lurking about going, I prophesy that you will die. It's great. Romeo and Juliet, there's the nurse, there's Lady Capulet, there's other female parts, right? The nurse is hilarious. Twelfth Night, The Winter's Tale, wonderful female parts. Again, bearing in mind that it was all men on stage. You know, wow, if I had an all-female theatre company, I don't know how many male parts I would bother writing. You know what? I don't know how good they would be. I don't know how many I would bother actually writing down. Because if the women have to play men and then we have to make it believable and we have to make it interesting, I don't know. I don't know what will happen. So I think it's incredibly interesting that Shakespeare creates such wonderful, developed, deep female characters. And I also think it's great that we're starting to be much more fluid with who can play Shakespeare on our stages. I think it's long overdue, and it's really wonderful to see the new practices that have started about 10, 15 years ago for some of them, with anyone being able to play any Shakespeare role. I think it's incredibly important. We still have a way to go for women to have as many roles as men, but it is, unfortunately, isn't it, one of the things that used to make it a bit unfair on women, because in any Shakespeare play you have, 10 parts go to men and 2 parts used to go to women. But now things are much better. That was also one of the things we wanted to do with Bard in the Yard, is to show that anyone can play Shakespeare, literally. This year, actually, we had more female identifying actors than male identifying actors, and I, in particular, quite enjoyed that.
Oh, I love love. Don't you? Yeah. Oh, I really love it, though, when it goes wrong.
Do you think Shakespeare loved the characters?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of Shakespeare's strengths is that he created such wonderfully well-rounded characters that have become archetypes in our cultural landscape. Characters such as Hamlet, Sir John Falstaff, Bottom with his ass head, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Lady Macbeth. They have become part of what we know. They have become part of our fairy tale, of our common imaginations. And you can't do that. You can't create that kind of complete human being with flaws galore. That's the beauty, is that he doesn't shy away from his character's flaws. And we love them because they're flawed. We love Sir John Falstaff because he's the worst knight in the world. That's why we love him. I think there's something very tender in the way Shakespeare writes, even when he writes things that are very hard. Even when he writes Richard III and turns him into the most devilish, awful creature that's ever walked the earth, there's still something that we like about him. That's the genius, right? We know he's a monster, but we like him, and that's love.
You know, I've had plenty of inspiration, role models, so to speak. I was raised by a formidable woman. And my wife, she's pretty remarkable, too. And then not to mention that we have been governed by a queen for all these years, and it's the most peaceful stint this blessed isle has ever known. I am absolutely enchanted by powerful women.
Shakespeare was married to his wife, Anne Hathaway. He was 18, she was 26. She gave birth to their first child 6 months after they were married. After their first daughter, they then had twins, Judith and Hamnet. And again, we don't know. I like to think that there was at least some sort of affection, you know, young love. You're 18, you fall in love with someone, you know. And then Shakespeare goes off to London, spends most of his life living in London. That's 2 days away, right? 2 days, quite a lot of money. His life is with the company, with the theatre company in London. Now, a lot of people like to think that Shakespeare was in love with the Earl of Southampton, to whom Shakespeare actually dedicated Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece, the 2 long poems he wrote during a bout of plague. The Earl of Southampton was much younger than Shakespeare when he wrote the poems. He was gorgeous. He was absolutely beautiful. We have portraits of him. He has this like long wavy blonde hair, just very angelic looking. He looks a bit like a Medicis if you paint these Italian families. He looks absolutely stunning. Shakespeare's sonnets, that again are very famous, including "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment." Now note, it's not "let me not to the marriage of true bodies," souls even, eyes, hearts. No. Let me not to the marriage of true minds. So who is that for? We believe that about 3/4 of the sonnets were written for a man who was fair-skinned and fair-haired, because a lot of references in the poems are to someone fair and golden and beautiful. And about 1/3 were written for the dark lady, for a woman. I personally like to believe that Shakespeare loved people, that he was in love with people, because I don't think you could have written what he has written if you weren't in love with people, if you weren't in love with human beings. And yeah, why not? Just give the man a nice sex life, right? Like, I hope he had a great time in London and that he gained some inspiration for his plays. There's a lovely story about Shakespeare and his mate Richard Burbage. So Richard Burbage was the star of his day, right? Richard Burbage would play all of the main parts in Shakespeare's plays. He would be the Richard and the Henrys and the Macbeths and the Hamlets, and he would be the star of the show. He was the Benedict Cumberbatch to Shakespeare's.
And we do like Benedict Cumberbatch.
We don't mind him. So Shakespeare overheard this groupie telling Richard Burbage, like, "Oh, I'll wait for you at this address, at this time tonight. Come join me in my chambers." Shakespeare overheard that, went to the address before Richard. And as Richard triumphantly arrived and announced himself, I mean, we assume it was dark, right? And there was no candles, because this woman just slept with this other guy. So as Richard arrived in the room and announced himself as, Richard III has arrived, Shakespeare, from the bed in the dark, replied, "Well, William the Conqueror beat him to it."
Hello, my name is Honey and I'm a British Nigerian actor and voiceover artist from South London. I have been blessed to work on a number of different Shakespeare projects, but honestly, working on Bard in the Yard is one of my career highlights. It was a challenge, but wow, it was also a huge reward, and something that I'm really grateful that I did. And I guess my favourite memory or moment is performing at Sadler Cathedral for their fundraising event called Bard in the Yard Under the Shard, and being able to perform in front of Timothy West, in front of Neil Constable, and so many other theatre patrons, and to really kind of just have fun with the show. I got given a microphone, a handheld microphone, like an hour. I got told I had to do it handheld an hour before I went on. I think I managed to roll with the punches really well, but it was an absolute joy, and yeah, just a joy to be able to do that show, and a true, as in the movie Inside Out, it was a core memory. Yeah.
Thank you to Alex Dunmore, Constanza Roof, Hannah Young, Henry Sharnock, Honey Gabriel, Jonathan Blakely, Jonathan McGarity, Keith McGuire, Will Harrison Wallace, Charlie McKellar, and all the other bards. King Leonardo is being performed by Rupert Sadler. The Scottish play is being performed by Luke Farrugia. This podcast is produced by Will & Co. and La Souris Verte and supported by the Swiss Cultural Fund UK. My name is Zelda Chauvet. This is Shakespeare Goes Viral.